In this collection of videos, we're thinking through how we understand and perhaps misunderstand the whole notion of salvation. In a previous video in this series, I talked about the way the whole Bible story is shaped between Genesis 1 and 2 and Revelation 21 and 22, where the strapline is, the dwelling of God is with humans. That's what creation was aimed at all along. God called the human pair to be his image bearers within this heaven plus earth reality. And when humans fail on that vocation, God's whole creation is put out of joint. So it's not just humans who have a problem, it's creation itself. But as the story unfolds, we see that God's purpose to come and dwell with his people remains central despite everything, despite the failure and folly of his people. So at the end of the book of Genesis, we find the family of Abraham, now the family of Jacob, in Egypt, and they become enslaved. At the beginning of the book of Exodus, which follows straight on, there they are, 100 or more years later, they are enslaved by the Egyptians, because God's people, in whose midst God is going to come to dwell, need to know that they are rescued slaves. They haven't just been able to wander into this new situation of having God come and live with them as though they didn't have a care in the world. Everything is determined by the fact that they are the saved people, the rescued people. And indeed, right the way on through the whole New Testament, the moment of Exodus, of God rescuing his people from slavery in Egypt, is the primary model of salvation. It's not just an illustration of a different truth. It's actually about God's intention for his people and for his creation. So the book of Exodus, which is fascinating in itself and often muddles people because you get the people being rescued from Egypt, which is very exciting. You get them brought out into the wilderness and they're brought to Mount Sinai. Moses goes up the mountain and comes down with the law. That's hugely exciting. And then almost immediately we get into details of the law and people reading that book. And I remember going through this when I was a teenager trying to read through the Bible for myself, being puzzled as to what happened to this nice story that I was so enjoying. And the answer is just persevere a bit longer, because the reason why God has brought the people out of Egypt, the reason why he's given them the law, is that he is going to come to dwell in their midst. This is not the final salvation, but it's a key stage on the way to salvation. So Moses on the mountain gets given the pattern of the tabernacle, which he is to make, which the people are to make with him, Aaron is to make, which is the place where then, Exodus chapter 40, God comes to dwell. And once again, we have a heaven plus earth, new creation. The tabernacle is a small working model of new creation, which is where the whole story of salvation, of rescue from Egypt, was always going. That, by the way, is why Exodus is immediately followed by the book we call Leviticus, which is all about the sacrificial system, which functions as a kind of health and safety regulation. Because if God is going to come and dwell in the midst, this is never going to be a cozy thing, a casual thing. The people need to know that this is the holy God, the Creator, the one who has saved and rescued them. And if he's going to be living in their midst, they need to mind their P's and Q's. They need to know what they're about. And so the story goes on, and the people arrive in the promised land. That's a whole other story in itself, of course. And eventually, after many generations, we have King David, and King David sets up his kingdom in Jerusalem. He wants to build a house for God, and interestingly, God won't let him do it because he's been too violent. He's got blood on his hands. But God says, in effect, that's not a bad idea, but it'll be your son who will do it. But then God says, actually, the real thing is not you building a house for me. God says, I will give you a house. What on earth does he mean? This is 2 Samuel 7. He means that when David is long gone, God will raise up his seed after him, who will sit on his throne, and God says, I will be his father, and he will be my son. It's as though God is saying, yes, I do want to come and dwell in your midst, but the way I want to come and dwell in your midst is not in a building of bricks and mortar and timber and stone. I want to come in and as a human being, great David's greater son. It's no surprise that the New Testament writers pick up those promises from 2 Samuel 7, blending them with Psalm 2 and other well-known similar passages to say this is what was finally accomplished in Jesus. But of course, it all goes horribly wrong again, as it was bound to do, because the people to whom the promises were made were themselves part of the problem. We see it in David, we see it in Solomon, we see it in generation after generation. So the temple where God has come to dwell, with 1 Kings 8 being very like Exodus 40, the divine glory coming to dwell there, the people in whose midst God has come to dwell rebel. They commit idolatry. They become wicked and sinful. And then, horror of horrors, God departs. The promise of God rescuing his people and coming to live with them has, as it were, turned inside out, because they, like Adam and Eve in the garden, have failed in their vocation. And so, like Adam and Eve being expelled from the garden, the people of God are expelled from the land, and they have to go off into exile in Babylon. And the biblical story then is, well, if that's happened, how on earth is salvation now going to happen? And the idea of salvation for Jews of that period living in Babylon and subsequently is focused again and again on, we want a new Exodus to rescue us from Babylon. But we're in Babylon because we sinned, because we committed idolatry. Therefore, salvation comes to mean forgiveness of sins. Think of that glorious passage in Isaiah chapter 40. Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and cry to her that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. God has dealt with her sins. And that's not so that Jewish people can, if they believe, go to heaven when they die. It's so that God will come again and dwell in their midst. The mountains will be flattened and the valleys will be filled in, and the glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. That's the way the story is working. And so we have this story of creation and covenant, but creation has gone wrong because the human pair failed to do what they were meant to do. The covenant has gone wrong because the covenant people have failed to be the people they were supposed to be. And so the great promises in the prophets of the exilic period and after are looking ahead to a time when God will renew the covenant and thereby and therefore will restore creation. This is the meaning of salvation. And we humans who hear this message now, and we'll return to this theme in a subsequent video, we humans are finding ourselves not in some abstract formula, but in the great story, from creation to new creation, from covenant to new covenant, the story which has Jesus at its heart, which has the Holy Spirit now as its energizing, salvation-producing drive. We have several videos in this series on the whole meaning of salvation. Please feel free to click the link to follow and watch the next one.